On Christmas Eve by the River Park in San Francisco, the city glittered with light, while the water swallowed every sound into black silence, and Ethan Blake sat on a frozen bench as if waiting for permission to stop existing. His expensive coat lay open to the cold as if punishment mattered, and in his bare hands, he held two documents that weighed more than the night: the agreement to sell his company and the quiet certainty of his will. Minutes earlier he had finished the transfer that handed control to Victor, the man he once trusted, the man who had guided every decision that led him to this edge, and the ink was barely dry when the shaking began. The river below moved like a dark lung, breathing in and out, and Ethan stood with one foot on the slick stone, counting the seconds not as time but as reason, each one another excuse he was running out of. 3 years earlier a car had folded in on itself on a wet highway, and the woman he loved had died with her phone still glowing in her hand, a message unsent that would burn into him like a brand. Since then every morning came with tablets, and every night with the same dream of glass and rain, and by December he had decided that survival without breath inside it was only a longer version of dying for him now. He lifted his gaze to the bridge lights, trembling across the water, and took one more step when a voice cut through the cold behind him, not loud, not afraid, exact as if it had practiced saving a life before. She spoke without raising her voice, the words carried on a thin thread of breath across the cold. "Don't cry. If you leave now, you'll die alone. And you don't deserve that." And the river seemed to listen with him. Ethan turned and saw a young woman in a thin delivery jacket, holding an insulated bag against her ribs, her eyes steady even as her hands trembled from cold and fear, a stranger who had chosen to interfere with purpose. He did not know her name and she did not know his, and the wealth that had bent the world around him meant nothing in that moment, as snow drifted between them like ash from a soft and holy fire. Somewhere a church bell began to mark the hour, and he realized he was still breathing, that the river had not claimed him yet, that the girl had stepped closer as if daring the night to take him anyway again. Her phone chimed inside the bag with the impatient insistence of a waiting order, but she ignored it and asked if he could sit back down, not as a command but as a kindness that assumed he wished to live. Ethan sank onto the bench as if gravity returned at once, the documents slipping from his grasp into a damp scatter at his feet, and for the first time the future felt like a doorway rather than a drop. She offered him a cup of water from the bottle in her pack, and he took it with shaking hands, their fingers brushing such a small contact that it might have meant nothing to the world and everything to him. Snow thickened and softened the edges of the city, while she spoke of ordinary things she loved as if building a bridge back to reason, the smell of bread at dawn and the quiet comfort of finished work at home. When the order on her phone pulsed again, she finally stood and told him she had to go, and he found himself afraid of losing the sound of her voice, more than the water that had called him moments before. Ethan asked for her name at last, and she smiled as if names could wait until the living had chosen to remain, giving him a nod and a promise that he could find her at the cafe that never closed. She walked away with quick, careful steps, and he watched until the delivery jacket vanished into snowfall, knowing nothing about her, except that she had spoken to him, as if he were still a person worth saving in this world. The river kept moving, and the bridge lights kept trembling, and somewhere inside him a stubborn pulse answered, slow but present, while the bench held him like a witness, and the snow wrote a line he could not yet read. Later he would remember this as the night he nearly disappeared and did not, the night a poor girl with tired hands and brave eyes stopped him with one sentence, and a truth he had been running from his own. The river had not taken him, but the cold that seeped into Ethan Blake's bones, as he sat on the bench long after the girl vanished, reminded him that survival was not the same as wanting to live. He remained there until the snow softened the edge of his shoes, and the documents at his feet turned damp and fragile, and when he finally rose it was not out of hope but exhaustion, the kind that comes after choosing not to die but still failing to find a single reason to continue. He walked back toward the private car waiting on the far side of the park, where the driver pretended not to watch him through the mirror, and Ethan climbed in without a word, sinking into the leather seat, as if the weight of staying alive pressed down harder than gravity itself. As the city lights streaked past the windows, he let his mind fall into the places he avoided, the corners where memory had teeth. 3 years earlier he had been a different man, ambitious and laughing too loud, leaning into the future with the confidence of someone who believed success and love were permanent roads. His fiancée Mara Collins had been the one who steadied him, a researcher who worked alongside him at Neurovita, brilliant, in the quiet way that made people underestimate her, until she spoke. Their life together had been a blueprint of promise, a wedding date circled in red ink, an apartment filled with books and mismatched mugs that always made her smile, and then one night a phone call shattered all of it. A wet road, a truck in the wrong lane, an impact so violent the car twisted into something unrecognizable. When Ethan arrived at the hospital, Mara was already gone, and the last message she had tried to send him, never delivered, glowed up at him from her cracked phone. It contained only 3 words: "We need talk." Those words burrowed into him like a splinter he could not remove, because later he learned that Mara had discovered financial irregularities in the company numbers that pointed to Victor Harlan, the man Ethan trusted as a brother, and that she planned to expose him. Ethan had told her to wait to let him handle it, to be careful about creating conflict right before the IPO. She had kissed his forehead and said she only wanted the truth to matter. The truth killed her, Ethan believed, and the guilt that followed lived inside him like a shadow no light could reach. After her funeral, he stopped answering phone calls and stopped believing in sleep, existing in a cycle of meetings, pills, silence, and rituals that made him look alive without feeling alive. Therapy sessions blurred together, Dr. Keller taking notes with patience as he talked around the wound but never through it, her voice gentle enough to keep him from collapsing, but not strong enough to pull him out. Neurovita grew quickly, hailed as the future of neural regeneration, and investors poured in with hungry smiles, but Ethan moved through the days like a machine, efficient and hollow, letting Victor step deeper into the company's structure. Victor took advantage of that hollowness. He smoothed numbers. He whispered reassurance. He positioned himself as the stabilizing force behind the IPO, and Ethan, too tired to question, let him. When federal regulators started sniffing around, Victor convinced Ethan to sign documents that redirected suspicion away from himself, and Ethan obeyed without reading carefully, trusting the man he should have feared most. The irony that the company built to heal the brain was run by a man whose own mind refused to heal was not lost on him. On the anniversary of Mara's death, he stood in the penthouse with glass walls and looked out at San Francisco, like a stranger, the view a wound instead of a wonder. That was the night he first stepped onto the balcony and wondered how far down the ground was, how quickly the pain would end, whether it might feel like rest. He did not jump that night, but the idea planted itself quietly, a seed waiting for winter. By early December, the board wanted to sell the company. Regulators were circling, and Victor insisted Ethan should relinquish control temporarily to protect the deal. Ethan accepted because everything inside him felt unworthy of fighting. He signed the document that afternoon, the ink drying like a verdict on the page. That night he walked to the river. He had timed it carefully, a night when the fog rolled in thick, a holiday, when the city made noise that would swallow any splash, a moment when no one would expect him anywhere. He would disappear without ceremony, no speeches, no final calls, no last attempts at hope. The plan was terrifying only in its simplicity. He reached the bench at the river with the resignation of a man who had outlived his capacity to suffer. He read Mara's final unsent words one last time, and slipped the phone into his coat like a relic. He stepped forward and heard the water calling, not in words but in relief. And then, impossibly, a girl in a thin jacket who could barely afford warmth stopped him. Her words cut through 3 years of silence. He did not understand why they hit him like a blow, but something in her tone refused to let him fall, not because she knew him or cared about his money, but because she saw a man about to die alone, and decided that was unacceptable. The car pulled up to his building, and he stepped into the marble lobby, nodding absently at the doorman who wished him a Merry Christmas. Ethan rode the elevator with the numb certainty that he owed the universe nothing now that the river had been denied only for the moment. But when he reached the penthouse, the memory of the girl's voice followed him in, stubborn and persistent, a thread of warmth refusing to dissolve. He placed the damp documents on the counter and stared at them as if seeing their consequences for the first time. His reflection in the window looked like a ghost, a man with too much money and not enough life. And for the first time in months he wondered whether staying alive meant he had to do something other than wait for death to find him again. He lay in bed, fully dressed, the city lights blinking through the curtains, and realized he did not know the girl's name, did not know why she cared, did not know if he deserved the chance she had forced back into his hands. All he knew was that he had already decided to die, and yet he was still here. And because she stopped him, the decision no longer felt finished. The night drifted toward dawn while Ethan stared at the ceiling, the cold still inside him, the guilt still present, but a single new question forming in the quiet. If a stranger believed his life was worth saving, could he learn to believe it, too? Lila Monroe woke before sunrise most days, not because she chose discipline but because survival required it. and as she tied her faded sneakers that morning, she reminded herself the way she always did that people like her did not get the luxury of falling apart. The apartment she rented by the week smelled faintly of mold no matter how often she scrubbed it, and each time she passed the cracked bathroom mirror, she avoided looking at her own reflection too long, afraid she might see the tiredness that had been following her since childhood. She grabbed her delivery jacket from the chair, the stitching fraying along the seams, and slipped her mother's thin silver bracelet over her wrist, a ritual she kept, even when her life gave her nothing else to keep. Her mother had bought the bracelet at a flea market years ago, telling her it was a symbol of light that refused to die. Lila had been 12 at the time, still young enough to believe adults always told the truth, still innocent enough to think love could keep people from breaking. A year later, her mother stepped in front of a train after months of debt collectors pounding on their door, leaving Lila with a note that said only, "I am sorry, do not let this darkness be yours." The note had been folded into her pocket, as she lived through foster homes and cheap apartments, and the slow realization that no one was coming to save her. At 17, she aged out of the system and began collecting jobs the way others collected hobbies. Anything to afford the next day, waitressing, cleaning houses, stocking shelves. She learned to make herself small at work, to smile politely, to keep her head down when customers yelled or managers barked orders. People assumed kindness came from naivety, but Lila understood kindness as a form of rebellion. The only thing she could control in a life that had taught her survival was a negotiation between struggle and grace. She left her apartment and walked through the early San Francisco cold breath clouding in the air, grateful for the quiet hours before traffic turned the city into something sharp. She delivered breakfast sandwiches to office buildings still half asleep, her delivery bag slung over her shoulder like a lifeline. She liked the steadiness of the morning routes, the predictability of steps and doors and faces she never had to talk to. By noon she was waitressing at a small diner near the Mission District, balancing plates on aching arms, while regulars called her sweetheart without learning her name. When the lunch rush faded, she grabbed a cup of soup meant for employees and ate it in the alley behind the diner, savoring the warmth even as the metal stairs pressed cold against her back. In the afternoon she cleaned the side rooms of St. Bridget's Church, sweeping glitter from the floor after children rehearsed their holiday pageant. She liked the hush of the sanctuary, when no one else was inside, the sun, through the stained glass painting soft colors on the pews, the way silence here felt gentle instead of threatening. Father Andrew sometimes left small envelopes for her with cash from the parish fund, telling her it was a bonus for extra work, even if there had been no extra work that week. She accepted it with gratitude, but never asked for more because she believed dignity mattered even when money did not stretch far enough. Evenings belonged to deliveries again, and it was on one of these shifts, cold wind biting through her jacket, when she saw the man by the river just before midnight. She had noticed wealthy men before, their coats polished, their shoes expensive, their eyes distant, but this one slumped forward as if trying to fold in on himself. She had paused, recognizing the posture from mirrors she refused to look into, and for a moment she debated whether she should keep walking. People like her learned early that stepping toward danger could cost more than stepping away, yet something in the way his shoulders shook, restrained and silent, made her choose the risk. When she spoke to him, the words came from a place she rarely touched, a place born of nights when she herself had felt one breath away from disappearing. She saw in him not a billionaire, or even a stranger, but a human being at the edge, and the instinct to save him rose before she could question its logic. After she walked away, she carried the weight of the encounter in her chest, a mix of fear and ache, as if she had left a piece of herself on that snow-covered path without understanding why. By the time she returned to the diner for the overnight shift, her hands still trembling, she tried to dismiss the incident as something she would never see, the end of a moment between two lonely people destined to vanish into separate nights. She brewed coffee for truck drivers and students, wiped counters, and worked until her knees stung. Yet the memory stuck, the way he looked at her after she spoke, the disbelief in his eyes, when he realized she was not asking for anything, not frightened by him, not impressed by him, simply present. When her shift ended, she rode the bus home and leaned her head against the window, watching streetlights blur like strings of gold, and thought about the way he held those papers, as if they mattered and did not matter at the same time. She wondered what kind of life could bring someone so wealthy to such a breaking point, a life where no one noticed you slipping beneath the surface. When she climbed the stairs to her apartment, she whispered to herself the sentence she always used to carry through difficult nights: someone has to stay kind even if it hurts, and she told herself that stopping for him was not foolish, it was consistent with the person she chose to be. Still, she could not deny the strange pull in her chest, the sense that something in her life had shifted slightly on its axis, as if the night had opened a door she could not yet see. She fell asleep, clutching her mother's bracelet, unaware that the man she saved was lying awake miles away, thinking about her voice and the way it had kept his feet on solid ground. She would meet him again before the year turned, though she did not know it yet, and the choice she had made in those few seconds by the river would draw her into a world she had never imagined belonging to. 2 nights after the river, Ethan Blake found himself wandering through the sleepless corners of San Francisco, as if some invisible thread tugged him from one street to the next. He could not focus on work, could not read the emails Victor sent with polite venom hidden between every line, could not sleep long enough for the pills to matter. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw snow, a trembling hand offering him water, and a voice that sounded like a memory he had forgotten he needed. Dr. Keller had once told him that people often returned mentally to the moment they were saved, clinging to it as proof that their existence was negotiable, but this felt different. He was not clinging to a moment, he was reliving a choice. At 2 in the morning he stepped into Moonlight Cafe, a place that looked held together by hope and caffeine fumes, a place where the neon sign buzzed like a lullaby for the broken. He had driven past it countless times without noticing, but tonight it felt familiar in a way that made no sense. The bell chimed as he walked in, releasing a faint scent of cinnamon and burnt espresso. A few night owls lingered by the windows, tapping laptops or staring at phones, as if trying to stay awake was its own kind of faith. Ethan took a seat in the corner where the shadows softened the edges of everything and ordered black coffee from a barista whose tattoos curled like vines down her arms. He wrapped his hands around the mug, letting heat soak into his fingers, wondering if warmth could ever reach the places grief had frozen inside him. While he sat there, replaying the words that had kept him alive, the door opened again and cold air swept in along with a girl in a thin jacket carrying a delivery bag. She blinked against the light, as if adjusting from darkness into something softer. Ethan's breath caught in his throat before reason formed. It was her, the girl who stopped him from disappearing. She walked to the counter, exhaustion visible in the slope of her shoulders, and placed her order with a voice that tried to sound awake but cracked at the edges. He did not decide to stand. His body moved before he could think, crossing the quiet floor toward her, until he was close enough to hear the faint tremble of her breath. She turned toward him, and for a moment, neither spoke, recognition flickering between them like the spark before a flame. She broke the silence first. "You look better than the last time I saw you." There was no hesitation, no awkwardness, only an honest observation that struck deeper than comfort. Ethan felt something inside him loosen. "I wanted to thank you," he said, though the words felt small compared to the weight they carried. She shook her head as the barista handed over her drink. "You do not need to thank me. I only said what anyone should say to someone hurting." But the truth was that most people did not stop for strangers at the edge of a river, and her humility only sharpened the ache in his chest. He gestured toward the empty seat across from his table. "If you are not rushing off, would you sit with me for a few minutes?" She hesitated long enough to reveal caution rather than disinterest, then nodded and followed him back to his corner. The cafe felt quieter once they sat, as if the world recognized the importance of giving them space. He watched her warm her hands on the cup, noticing the red marks on her knuckles, the wear on her jacket, the exhaustion she did not try to hide. "What brought you to the river that night?" she asked, suddenly surprising him. He considered lying. He had grown used to crafting answers that pleased investors, journalists, employees, anyone but himself. But her eyes waited without pressure, and he found himself telling the truth in pieces like unraveling a thread. "It was not one thing," he said. "More like an accumulation. Grief, guilt, too much silence, not enough hope." She nodded slowly, as if she understood the language of edges. "I know something about silence," she said. "It can feel like drowning even before you touch the water." He studied her face, the resilience etched into her features, the quiet dignity she wore like armor. "You saved my life," he said, softer this time. She laughed under her breath, shaking her head. "I only interrupted your timing. You saved your own life by stepping back." But he knew better. He had not stepped back. He had frozen, anchored by her words, her presence, her courage to speak into a darkness he believed was impenetrable. The barista dimmed the lights slightly as the hours stretched deeper into night. Outside the windows, snow drifted in lazy swirls. "Do you come here often?" he asked, and she smiled faintly. "Only when I need warmth before the next delivery." He almost asked about her family, her work, her dreams, but he held back, afraid to pry. afraid she might disappear if he pushed too quickly. "Do you mind if I ask your name?" he said finally. She looked down at her cup as if considering whether the question cost more than she could afford. "Names carry weight," she murmured. "But I guess we shared something heavier already." She lifted her gaze, steady and clear. "Lila." The name fit her soft but strong. He repeated it once, not to impress her but to anchor it in him. She did not ask for his name, and he did not offer it. The anonymity felt like a rare luxury, a pause between truths. When her phone buzzed with the next delivery request, she rose reluctantly. "I should go. People are waiting on their food and they tip less if it gets cold." He stood too quickly, almost reaching for her hand before stopping himself. "Will I see you again?" She shrugged gently. "If life is kind." He wanted to tell her that life had not been kind to either of them, that kindness sometimes came disguised as strangers at riverbanks, but the words lodged in his throat. She gave him a small wave and walked toward the door, snowlight catching in her hair. As she stepped outside, she paused and looked back through the glass, meeting his eyes with something that felt like an echo of their first encounter, a silent reminder that he was still here because she existed at the right moment. Then she was gone into the falling snow, and Ethan sat back down with a heart that beat too loudly for a man who had planned to die. For the first time in years, he stayed until his coffee went cold, replaying her voice as if it were a promise he did not yet know how to claim. Ethan did not plan to tell Lila anything about his past, certainly not the part that carved itself into him like a scar that never healed, but in the days after their second meeting, something inside him began to shift, a loosening in the places he had kept sealed. He returned to Moonlight Cafe 4 nights in a row, always around 2 in the morning each time, half expecting her to walk through the door again, each time staring at the entrance with the restless attention of someone waiting for a train that might never come. She did not appear, and with each absence his thoughts returned to Mara, the woman he had once believed would be the last chapter of his emotional life. Before her death, Mara Collins had been the person who saw him not as a rising CEO or a visionary entrepreneur but as a man who sometimes feared his own brilliance. They met in graduate school at Stanford, both working in neural research labs, both fascinated by the fragile architecture of the human brain. Mara had the quiet confidence of someone who understood complexity without worshipping it, and when she laughed, it created a warmth in him that he did not know he needed until it disappeared. Their love had grown slowly, built on intellectual partnership and late-night study sessions, and the kind of intimacy that came from sharing ambition rather than competing with it. When Neurovita began, she stood beside him through the early failures and celebrated every breakthrough with him, her hand always steady on his back. She was the first person he told about Victor Harlan, the man who impressed him with charm, calculated risk-taking, and a financial brilliance Ethan felt grateful for. Victor had been older, polished, someone who could talk investors into seeing gold where only a dream existed. Ethan trusted him sometimes too easily, and Mara worried, telling Ethan to watch the numbers, to listen to the instincts that had created the company. He brushed off her concerns, attributing her caution to academic skepticism rather than actual danger. And then the numbers began to shift in ways that did not fit the data. Mara spent 2 months quietly tracing patterns in financial filings, stock movement, clinical reporting, and internal memos. The night before she died, she showed Ethan a folder full of evidence, a thread of manipulation that pointed to Victor as the architect of fraud disguised as innovation. Ethan had stared at the papers and felt the ground tilt, not because he doubted her but because he feared what exposing the truth would do to the company. Investors already trembled when the market inhaled too sharply, and scandal could destroy everything before their research reached the patients who needed it. He had begged her to wait a few days, told her he would confront Victor privately, told her transparency mattered, but timing mattered too. Mara agreed reluctantly, kissing him with the quiet sadness of someone who sensed the world shifting beneath her but chose love over fear. When she left for the conference the next morning, she messaged him that they would talk tonight, that she had thought of a way to handle things without blowing up the entire company. The message never reached him. Instead, his phone rang with a number he did not recognize, and the world shattered in the sterile glow of a hospital hallway. He reached her too late. The last person to see her alive had been a paramedic, who said she had clutched her phone in her hand, as if trying to send something before the darkness swallowed her. That cracked phone became the relic he kept beside his bed for months, the unsent words glowing like a prophecy of everything he had lost. After her death, regulators began circling Neurovita, sniffing for fraud, and Victor put on the performance of a lifetime, weeping at board meetings, calling Mara a brilliant woman taken too soon. insisting that he would honor her work by guiding the company through its turbulence. Ethan could barely speak during those meetings, the weight of his grief pressing down until he could only nod, sign documents, and follow the momentum of decisions that did not feel like his anymore. Victor used that silence. He used Ethan's guilt. He used Ethan's absence from the details of financial oversight to tighten his grip on the company. Dr. Keller told Ethan once that guilt can be a form of self-punishment designed to keep us from moving forward, that mourning becomes a cage when we confuse it with loyalty. Ethan had clung to that cage because on some level, he believed Mara died because of him, because he told her to wait, because he prioritized caution over conviction. And so he allowed himself to fade from his own company, letting Victor become the voice investors trusted, the man who controlled the narrative, the one who appeared in interviews while Ethan's name became a symbol rather than a presence. He remembered lying on the cold floor of their penthouse 6 months after the accident, Mara's lab coat draped across his chest like a shield against the world, and wondering how anyone lived after losing the one person who saw them clearly. When he met Lila, or rather when she stopped him from collapsing into the river, the memory of Mara felt like a stone in his throat. He had not spoken her name aloud in nearly a year, but now, moving through the city with the echo of Lila's voice still in his chest, he felt guilt sharpen into something closer to truth. Secrets did not die with the people who held them. Secrets rotted, secrets expanded, secrets demanded air. On the 5th night he returned to Moonlight Cafe and found her again. She was at a table near the window, rubbing warmth into her palms after a long shift, her face drawn with fatigue but softened by candlelight from a flickering table lamp. He sat across from her without waiting to be invited, sensing she had expected him somehow. "You look tired," she said gently. He exhaled a long breath. "There is something I have not told you." She folded her hands and waited, giving him space without urging. Ethan felt the crack inside him widen a fracture, exposing the raw center he had hidden for too long. "The woman I loved died because of a lie," he began, and as he spoke, the cafe around them disappeared into stillness. He told her about Mara, about the evidence she uncovered, about the message she tried to send, about the accident that did not feel like coincidence. He told her about Victor, about the guilt that had hollowed him out, about the nights he had stood on balconies, imagining a world without him. Lila did not interrupt. She did not pity him. She simply listened with a gravity that made him feel as though his grief belonged somewhere other than the inside of his ribs. When he finished, she reached across the table, cautiously resting her fingertips near his wrist, rather than on it, a silent offering rather than a claim. "You loved her deeply," Lila said, "and you lost her unfairly. None of that means your life ended with hers." He swallowed hard. "I do not know how to carry the weight of it." "Then let someone help you," she whispered. "But you have to let yourself be carried too." He looked at her in the dim light, at the resilience in her eyes that reminded him of courage he thought he no longer possessed. In the quiet between them something shifted. It was not love, not yet, but it was the first step toward wanting to live, rather than simply refusing to die. For the first time in years, Ethan Blake woke with a sense of forward motion rather than dread, though he did not yet have a name for it. He found himself checking his phone, not for messages from Victor or the board, but for the possibility of a delivery confirmation that might mean Lila was nearby. He told himself it was irrational, that he was a man who had once negotiated billion-dollar contracts without blinking, yet now his heartbeat stuttered at the thought of a girl who carried coffee and late-night meals through the city. Somewhere in the quiet hours after their conversation in Moonlight Cafe, something inside him shifted from numbness to awareness, as if grief had loosened enough for something softer to slip through. He did not call her or try to find her again. Some instinct told him she needed space to breathe, that stepping into her world without invitation would feel like intrusion rather than connection. But fate or coincidence, or something more stubborn than logic, had other plans. 3 days later, Ethan arrived at the Neurovita Winter Gala, a mandatory appearance despite the exhaustion dragging behind his eyes. The ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel glittered with chandeliers, and money executives offering false laughter and investors swirling champagne, as if success could be drunk like oxygen. Ethan hated these events, but Victor insisted. His presence reassured the board, and Ethan no longer had the strength to argue. He moved through the room like a ghost, shaking hands, nodding at pleasantries, hearing words, but absorbing none of them. The air felt too warm, the lights too sharp, and the people too loud. It was a world he had once mastered but now felt allergic to. Then, just as he reached for another glass of seltzer, he did not want a tray passed in front of him, and the air caught in his lungs. "Lila." Wearing a black catering uniform, a size too large, hair pulled back in a messy knot, hands steady as she balanced appetizers, she clearly wished she could afford to eat herself. She did not see him at first. She was too focused on navigating the glittering crowd that treated servers as moving furniture. Ethan stood frozen, shock and awe tangling in his chest, because seeing her here in his world felt like two universes colliding. A group of tech investors waved at her impatiently, demanding service. One of them, a man whose name Ethan did not remember but whose arrogance he knew well, snapped his fingers at her. "Hurry up, sweetheart. Guests do not like to wait." Lila offered a polite nod despite the sting of humiliation on her cheeks. Ethan felt heat crawl through him and anger he had not experienced in months, an instinct to defend her that rose with startling force. He stepped toward them, without thinking. "She is not here to be talked to like that." His voice cut through the ballroom with a quiet authority that dropped several conversations into silence. The investor blinked confused, then startled when he realized who had spoken. Ethan Blake, the notoriously private CEO. The man with the tragic story the media whispered about. The investor stammered an apology, one too quick to be sincere. "Of course, Ethan. My mistake. No harm meant." Ethan's gaze did not leave him until the man lowered his eyes and retreated. Only then did Ethan turn to Lila. She looked at him with disbelief, shock, and something else he could not yet name. "You should not be here," she whispered. "It is not your job to defend me." He shook his head gently. "It was absolutely my job. No one gets to speak to you like that." Her breath trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from navigating the sudden collision of their worlds. "What are you even doing at a place like this?" she murmured. Ethan almost smiled. "I could ask you the same thing." She huffed a breath that might have been a laugh if the room had not felt so hostile. "I needed the extra shifts this month. Rent went up again." He felt a knot tighten in his chest. The contrast between her struggling to pay rent and him once owning entire blocks of the city made him feel like everything he had built was a monument to the wrong things. Before he could reply, a voice broke in from behind. "Ethan, there you are." Victor Harlan approached with his polished smile, shaking hands with donors as he walked. His eyes flicked to Lila for a single cold second, evaluating her, dismissing her, filing the information away like ammunition he would use later. Ethan sensed danger in that glance but did not yet know how deep it ran. Victor placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You should be talking to the venture group from Boston. They need reassurance about the expansion plan." Ethan stepped out of his reach. "I am not doing that right now." Victor's smile tightened. "Then, what exactly are you doing?" Ethan turned fully toward him. "I am making sure your staff is treated with basic human decency." Gasps rippled around them. Victor's eyes narrowed with irritation, but he could not afford to make a scene in front of investors. Of course," he said smoothly. "Let us not overreact. Perhaps this young lady was simply overwhelmed." Ethan moved slightly, positioning himself between Victor and Lila, as if shielding her from a storm. "She does her job well," Ethan said. "Maybe better than most people in this room." Lila stared at him, eyes wide, cheeks flushed with embarrassment and something more fragile. Ethan offered her a small nod, an unspoken reassurance that she was not alone here. The room had shifted. Whispers rose. Cameras tilted. People began murmuring about the mysterious brunette server the CEO seemed unusually protective of. Victor sensed the shift instantly. He leaned close to Ethan's ear, voice dripping warning. "This is not a good look. You cannot afford attention like this." Ethan did not look at him. "I am not concerned about optics. I am concerned about humanity." Victor stepped back, expression turning rigid. His eyes glinted with something dark. "We will talk later." As Victor walked away, Ethan finally exhaled, tension rolling off him like a breaking wave. Lila lowered her tray and whispered, "You should not have done that." But her voice carried not anger, only fear for him. He met her gaze. Someone needed to. For a moment they existed in a bubble untouched by the glittering cruelty around them. Just two people seeing each other clearly in a world that depended on pretending. She lifted her tray again, ready to return to work. But before she turned, she said softly, "You did not have to stand up for me." He replied just as softly, "Maybe I needed to." She left him standing there, stunned by the truth in his own words. When love begins where power ends, it does not announce itself with fireworks, but with the smallest acts of courage. A voice spoken into a room designed to silence a choice, to protect someone who owes you nothing. That night, a better version of Ethan opened his eyes for the first time, and the power he lost did not compare to the humanity he rediscovered in the presence of a girl who could not afford to break. The gala should have ended as nothing more than a humiliating night. Lila tried to forget, and a moment of defiance. Ethan replayed in silence, but rooms filled with wealth are also rooms filled with hunger, and by morning someone had already decided her existence could be twisted into a weapon. The first hint came as Lila finished her oatmeal in the diner break room, rubbing warmth into her freezing fingers before her shift. Maria, the senior waitress, burst in, holding her phone with a look that mixed pity and alarm. "Honey, is this you?" Lila frowned, confused, until Maria turned the screen, and there it was. A photograph of her at the gala, tray in hand, Ethan standing inches away, his gaze unmistakably protective. The picture had been taken from an angle that made proximity look intimate. The caption beneath it, on a gossip site, read, "Neurovita CEO seen comforting mystery woman at high-profile gala." Could she be the reason for internal turmoil? The article speculated wildly, stitching rumors into a narrative that played like a scandal. It painted Lila as an opportunist, a secret lover, a possible informant. It claimed she had been seen entering private rooms, though she had not left the kitchen except to serve appetizers. It suggested she might be tied to ethical violations inside the company, though she did not even understand the words used. Lila's stomach twisted, nausea rising until she had to sit. "This is ridiculous," she whispered. But the internet did not require truth, it required fuel. And Victor Harlan was more than willing to provide it. By noon, a second article appeared, this time from a supposedly credible financial blog, citing unnamed insiders who claimed the woman at the gala was connected to Mara Collins' death. It used the word investigation, baiting readers into imagining crimes where none existed. Ethan saw the article while sitting in his office, the morning light fractured across the floor. His pulse spiked, breath stuttering. He read the lines again and again, hoping the words would rearrange into something less poisonous. They did not. Someone was attacking her. Someone knew exactly how to wound him. He slammed the laptop shut and stood so quickly his chair rolled back and hit the wall. He stormed into the hall without his coat, ignoring the startled assistants calling his name. He knew who was behind it. Victor did not even pretend to hide the smugness when Ethan barged into the executive lounge where he sat sipping espresso with two board members. "Ethan, you look tense," Victor said with a cool smile. "Something bothering you?" Ethan tossed the printed article onto the table. "You did this." Victor lifted the page, skimming it as if it were a casual inconvenience. "I think the press is simply doing what it always does. You made quite a scene at the gala. People noticed." The board members shifted uncomfortably. Ethan leaned in, voice low and shaking. "She is innocent. Remove it. Now." Victor's smile sharpened into something predatory. "Ethan, my friend, public perception is fragile. Associating with staff in such a dramatic manner suggests instability. Investors do not like instability." Ethan felt something dangerous stir in him, an anger he had kept buried under grief. "You leave her out of this." Victor set down his cup with slow precision. "You made her the story when you put yourself between her and that investor. The company cannot afford distractions, and neither can you." Ethan took a step forward, fists clenched, but one of the board members intervened, murmuring about liability and optics. Victor simply adjusted his cufflinks and walked out with the air of a man who had just made his next move. Within hours, the fallout began. Lila arrived at the catering company only to be summoned to the office. Her manager, flustered and sweating, told her a major client had complained about her presence at the gala. He refunded her remaining scheduled shifts and told her she should probably look for work elsewhere. "We cannot risk bad press," he said, avoiding her eyes. "I am sorry, but this is business." She left in silence. At the diner, her name had already circulated through group chats, customers pointing at her, wondering aloud if she was the mysterious woman involved with a billionaire. The manager pulled her aside and told her he needed to put her on hold until things settled down. She nodded numbly, unable to form words. The final blow came when she returned to her apartment. The landlord stood outside her door, holding a printed copy of the article. He said he did not want trouble, that the property had a reputation to protect. She tried to argue, reminding him she always paid on time, but he shook his head and told her she had until tomorrow to clear out. Lila felt the floor tilt. It was as if the world had decided she was a threat, simply because she had been kind to the wrong man. That night, she wandered the streets with her backpack slung over her shoulder, the city lights blurring through her tears. She had no family to call, no savings to rely on, no safe place to land. She found a bench outside a closed bookstore and sat there, shivering, wrapping her coat tighter around her body, trying to breathe through the panic threatening to consume her. Why? Why was her life being destroyed for something she did not even understand? Meanwhile, Ethan spent the afternoon calling every department in Neurovita, demanding takedowns, corrections, retractions. Lawyers stalled, PR teams deflected, and Victor's influence cast a long shadow. By evening, Ethan had alienated half the board and gained nothing except the growing realization that he had underestimated Victor's cruelty. When he finally searched the city for Lila, she was no longer answering her phone. He drove through the Mission District, past the diner, past the church, where she sometimes cleaned, past the alleys where delivery cyclists gathered to warm their hands. With each block, panic clawed deeper into him. Had she been hurt? Had someone threatened her? Had she disappeared because of him? The idea tore at him with a violence he had not felt since Mara's death. Then, as he passed the bookstore near 24th Street, he saw a figure curled on a bench, her backpack pressed to her chest. His breath broke. Lila. He pulled over and approached slowly, afraid of startling her. She looked up and he saw the pain in her eyes, a mixture of exhaustion and betrayal, and the moment their gazes met, she whispered, "Why is this happening to me?" Ethan knelt beside her, his voice raw. "Because of me. Because I failed to protect you." She shook her head, tears tracing cold paths down her cheeks. "I did nothing wrong. I did nothing." "I know," he murmured, reaching but stopping inches before touching her. "And I am going to fix this. Every part of it." She looked at him with a heartbreak that cut deeper than anger. "You have no idea how much power people like your world have to ruin people like me." He inhaled sharply. "Then let me use whatever power I have left to save you." Her voice trembled. "Why would you do that?" Ethan finally answered the truth he had been avoiding. "Because losing you feels like losing my life all over again." The night was cold around them, but between that confession and her trembling breath, something fragile and real formed a spark in the darkness. The beginning of a bond built not on power, but on the ruin left behind. Ethan Blake had always believed power was something you preserved through silence, through control, through knowing when to hold your breath and when to speak. But as he knelt beside Lila, on that cold bench, watching the way her life had been wrecked, simply because she crossed paths with him, something inside him shifted with the finality of a snapped bridge cable. Power meant nothing if it destroyed the innocent. He helped her stand, taking her backpack when her fingers shook too hard to grip it. She was freezing, trembling beneath her thin jacket. "Let me take you somewhere safe," he said quietly. She hesitated, searching his face for deceit, for motives, for danger, but found only sincerity wrapped in exhaustion. She nodded once. He drove her to a small hotel near the Embarcadero, not the penthouse, not a suite, just somewhere warm where she could breathe without fear. She stood awkwardly in the doorway while he checked her in, looking like she might bolt at any moment. When he handed her the keycard, she didn't take it immediately. "I cannot pay you back for this," she whispered. "I am not asking for anything," he replied, and he meant it more than anything he had said in years. After she disappeared into the room, he sat in his car for a long time, gripping the steering wheel hard enough that his knuckles went white. He could feel a storm building, one he had been avoiding for years. He had let Victor destroy too much already. He would not let him destroy her. At dawn, Ethan walked into Neurovita headquarters with the force of a man at war with his own past. The security guard straightened. Assistants scrambled. People murmured his name as though he were a ghost returning to haunt the place that killed him. Victor was already in the executive conference room preparing for the quarterly meeting. The board members sat around the table, sipping coffee, reviewing reports, pretending the company wasn't being reshaped by scandal and fear. When Ethan entered, the room fell silent. Victor offered a rehearsed smile. "Ethan, good to see you upright. I was beginning to worry." Ethan ignored the jab. His voice was low, calm, deadly. "All articles about the woman you targeted will be removed today. Every press statement will be retracted, every rumor corrected, and you will issue a public apology." The board stared as if he'd spoken in an unfamiliar language. Victor leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Ethan, my friend, you are emotional. Understandable, given the loss you have endured. But this company cannot bend because you feel protective over someone who means nothing in the larger picture." A slow, dangerous fury spread through Ethan's chest. "She means everything in the picture. You are terrified of being exposed," he said. Victor's eyes hardened. "Do not push this, Ethan. I have been covering for you for years. The insomnia, the mistakes, the debt of your grief. I protected your position, and this is how you repay me." Ethan stepped closer. "You protected yourself. You buried the financial trail Mara uncovered. You twisted the truth after she died. You blamed regulators, competitors, anyone but yourself." Victor stood abruptly, voice rising. "I saved this company. You were too broken to lead. Someone had to take control. "And you think I won't expose that?" Ethan said. "If you come after her again, I will burn every bridge you built." Gasps echoed around the table. One board member whispered, "Is he threatening internal disclosure?" Victor smoothed his tie with a trembling hand. "Ethan, listen to yourself. You are risking everything for a woman you barely know." Ethan's reply was quiet but carried the weight of something irreversible. "I choose her." Silence crashed over the room. Then Victor exhaled a slow, dangerous laugh. "Then you are done here," he signaled to the board. "Effective immediately, I am calling for a vote to suspend Ethan Blake from all executive duties." "You cannot do this," one member murmured, uncertain. "Watch him," Victor said. "He is unstable. He is compromised. He is willing to destroy the company over some server girl." Ethan felt the words like knives but held his ground. The board whispered, argued, glanced at headlines and legal implications. These were people who feared scandal more than wrongdoing, who preferred the illusion of stability to the substance of truth. When the vote finished, one of the older members cleared his throat. "The board hereby suspends Ethan Blake from his role as CEO until further review." Hearing it aloud felt like being hollowed out. Not because he lost the position, he had already been letting go of it piece by piece, but because Victor had managed to twist the truth again using fear as both shield and weapon. Victor smiled, victorious. "The company will announce the transition later today." Ethan did not respond. He simply walked out of the room without looking back, ignoring the whispers, the pitying glances, the fear. Outside, cold air slapped his face. He inhaled deeply, letting the loss settle, letting the truth burn into clarity. He had chosen Lila not because he was trying to be her savior or because she needed rescuing, but because for the first time since Mara died, he had found something he was willing to protect without hesitation. And he would not apologize for that. As he reached the parking garage, his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. The first line made his pulse stop. "Leave the girl alone if you want to survive this." The second line was worse. "She is more useful, broken." Ethan stared at the screen, stomach twisting. Victor was not simply protecting the company. He was targeting Lila with deliberate cruelty, pushing her into the same shadows Mara had been trapped in. For a moment, Ethan saw the river again. The snow. Lila's voice pulling him back from the edge. He whispered to himself, "Not again." He drove to the hotel immediately. When he reached her door, she opened it slowly, exhaustion lining her face. "You look terrible," she said weakly. He stepped inside, unable to hide the truth. "They removed me, suspended me." Her breath caught. "Because of me." "Because of him," Ethan corrected. "Because he cannot stand that someone saw the real me before he could bury it." Lila sank onto the edge of the bed, hands shaking. "So, what happens now?" Ethan looked at her with a clarity that surprised even him. "Now we fight back." Her eyes lifted, searching his face, and for the first time, she saw not a collapsing man but someone rebuilding himself from the ruins. He had lost his throne, his company, his reputation. But he had chosen her, and that choice felt like the first honest thing he had done in years. The hotel room felt too small for the storm gathering between them, a fragile pocket of borrowed safety suspended above a city that suddenly seemed full of eyes. Lila sat on the edge of the bed, clutching her mother's bracelet, as if holding herself together by instinct, while Ethan paced the narrow space with the restless urgency of a man who had run out of time. He had been removed from his company, stripped of his power, and threatened by a force he once believed was his closest ally. And now every breath he took seemed threaded with fear for her. Lila watched him, exhaustion drawing soft bruises beneath her eyes. "You cannot protect me from someone like him, Ethan." He stopped. "I will not let him hurt you." "You say that like it is a choice," she whispered. "But his world is bigger than me, bigger than both of us." Ethan knelt in front of her, his voice raw. "You saved my life. I will save yours." She shook her head, tears gathering but refusing to fall. "That is not how life works. You have to stop thinking you can fix everything by destroying yourself again." He froze at the word again. She saw the flinch and softened her tone. "You were ready to die a week ago. And now you are ready to burn everything down for me. I cannot let you do that." His voice dropped. "I am not burning anything down." Victor already lit the match. "I am just refusing to let him hold it." Lila looked away. Every instinct in her screamed that getting close to powerful men only ever ended with someone like her paying the price. She had lived her whole life learning how to survive quietly without leaving marks or drawing shadows. And yet in a week she had become a target simply for existing near him. She stood abruptly, walking toward the window that overlooked the glittering Embarcadero lights. She wrapped her arms around herself as if trying to contain something threatening to break her open. Ethan moved toward her slowly. Lila. She didn't turn. Do you know what they are saying about me online? About what I must have done to get your attention. About what kind of woman I am. He swallowed a rising ache. They are wrong. They do not care if they are wrong. She pressed her forehead to the cold window pane. I lost my job, my home, my reputation, and I barely had anything to lose. But you are losing everything left of your world because of me. He stepped closer, voice steady. It is not because of you. It is because I finally stopped letting him control me. She closed her eyes. It does not matter what the reason is. As long as I am here, he will use me. He will use your guilt. He will twist both until you break. I will not let him break you, Ethan said, a quiet vow threading through the air. That is the problem, she whispered. I cannot be the reason you destroy what is left of your life. She turned around, and he saw the decision already forming in her eyes, like a light dimming. His chest tightened. Lila, do not do this. She forced a soft, heartbreaking smile. You told me once that grief becomes a cage when we confuse it with loyalty. You do not owe me anything. You do not need to save me. I want to save you, he said. That is not love, she murmured. That is desperation. The words struck him like a blade. He opened his mouth to argue, but the truth was complicated, tangled in grief and longing and fear of losing her the way he lost Mara. Lila stepped back gently, creating space between them. You told me your life already ended once. I am not letting it end again because of me. Ethan reached for her hand, but she pulled away. Please do not make this harder. He shook his head, breath uneven. Lila, please. She closed her eyes. She could not afford to break, not now, not in front of him. She had survived too much by holding herself together, and falling apart felt like a luxury she was never allowed. She placed the hotel keycard on the nightstand. This is the last kindness I can accept. And then, before he could stop her, she slipped past him and opened the door. Lila. His voice cracked. Do not walk away from me. She paused only long enough to whisper. I am walking away to save you. Then the door closed. Ethan rushed into the hallway, but the elevator had already begun descending. He took the stairs, sprinting down 12 flights, bursting into the lobby, but the cold blast of air outside met him with only empty streets. She was gone. He staggered to the curb, searching for any sign of her, calling her name into the indifferent winter night. Fog rolled across the pavement, snow drifted lazily, and the city swallowed every echo. He pulled his phone from his pocket and dialed her number. Straight to voicemail. Again. And again. Nothing. He drove through the Mission District, past every corner she had once mentioned, past the diner, the church, the alleys, the bus stops. He checked the shelters, the train stations, the markets. He stopped everyone who resembled her shape in the dark, desperate, breathless, unraveling. Hours passed. The city began to wake, and Ethan, once a man who navigated the world with precision and command, now moved like someone drowning above water. At sunrise, he returned to the river park, the place where it began, hoping some irrational part of fate might return her to him the way she once returned him to himself. Snow covered the bench. A single object rested on it, a soft gray scarf, the one she had worn the night she saved him. He lifted it with shaking hands. A folded note was tucked inside. He unfolded it, breath unsteady, and the words carved him open. I cannot be the reason you fall. I cannot let myself be used against you. You deserve a life greater than the ruin Victor created, so I am giving you the only thing I can. Distance. Do not look for me. Let me disappear so you can finally rise. I am grateful for every moment you let me matter. L. At the bottom of the page, faint and smudged, was a final line she must have hesitated before writing. I am sorry. Ethan closed his eyes, gripping the scarf to his chest as if it were the last warm thing in a freezing world. The river moved quietly beside him, the same place he had once planned to end his life. Now it witnessed something far crueler. The woman who saved him had vanished into the night, not because she wanted to leave, but because she believed it was the only way to save him. He whispered her name into the wind. Lila. But the snow fell without answering, and Ethan Blake, for the second time in his life, realized he had lost someone he could not bear to lose. The morning after Lila vanished, Ethan Blake sat in his penthouse, surrounded by the fragments of a life he no longer recognized. The scarf she left resting across his knees like a weight he did not know how to bear. San Francisco's skyline glimmered beyond the glass walls, but the city felt muted, distant, like a painting hung too far away to touch. He had spent the night searching for her until exhaustion hollowed him out. Every shelter, every church, every late-night diner, nothing. She had cut herself from the world with the precision of someone who had been disappearing her whole life. Ethan pressed the scarf to his face, breathing in the faint trace of cinnamon and cold air, the last remnants of her presence. She left to save him. And he could not protect her until he destroyed the man who had hunted her. Victor Harlan had always been a shadow Ethan mistook for shelter, but shadows do not protect, they swallow. Ethan rose from the couch with a clarity forged from grief and fury. He could not find Lila until he dismantled the power that chased her. He needed truth, and truth required allies unbound by corporate loyalty. Rachel Shaw had built a reputation on exposing corruption in Silicon Valley, sharp, fearless, brilliant enough to unravel a lie before the man telling it realized he'd spoken. Ethan contacted her through an encrypted connection, and within an hour, she arrived at his penthouse, carrying 2 laptops, a voice recorder, and an energy that crackled like stormlight. She stepped inside, took one look at him, and said, "I assume this is not a social visit." Ethan shook his head. "Someone I care about is in danger. Because of what Victor has done, I need to expose him. Fully." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "People usually hire me after they lose everything, not while they still have pieces left." "I already lost what mattered," he murmured. She studied him for a long moment, her expression shifting from skepticism to recognition. "All right, Ethan, show me the rot." They worked for hours as the winter light bled into the room. Ethan pulled up years of financial discrepancies, internal memos Mara once analyzed, legal threats Victor issued to silence concerns. Rachel typed like a surgeon, operating on a dying patient, slicing through data, linking, framing timelines. "This is larger than embezzlement," she muttered. "It is systemic fraud, misleading investors, underreporting safety issues, manufacturing results to inflate stock value before the IPO." Ethan swallowed the rising nausea. "And Mara knew." Rachel nodded grimly, and she confronted him. She paused. "The accident. Do you think it was an accident?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "I used to think coincidence was easier to believe. But easier is not the same as true." Rachel leaned back, absorbing the weight of his words. "If this is real, Victor will come after us both." "He already did," Ethan said quietly. "That is why we do not stop." By evening, Rachel had compiled enough evidence to trigger federal investigation. They drove to her office, a cramped newsroom pulsing with the sound of keyboards and the smell of burnt coffee. Rachel briefed her editor, who listened with growing astonishment before nodding. "Run it. Tonight. We will do a simultaneous release. Article, video, data leaks. We hit fast. We hit hard. No room for spin." Ethan stood in the corner, gripping Lila's scarf in his coat pocket, silently praying this would be enough to give her a world safe enough to return to. At 9:47 p.m., the story went live. The truth behind Neurovita's empire: fraud, silence, and a CEO's fall. Within minutes, social media ignited like dry fields catching flame. Investors panicked, regulators mobilized, the public reeled. Victor responded exactly as expected. He went on national television with rehearsed outrage, calling the reports defamatory, claiming Ethan was mentally unstable, grieving, acting out of personal vendetta. But the documents Rachel released were undeniable. Screenshots, emails, wire transfers, whistleblower testimonies, data models revealing how Victor manipulated clinical results to inflate stock value. And then came the final blow. A video clip Rachel obtained from a former employee, Victor screaming into a phone, furious that Mara had stuck her nose where it didn't belong. Ethan watched it alone in Rachel's office, the image blurring as something inside him cracked open. Rage, grief, vindication, a truth he wished had not come too late. Reporters began calling him non-stop. The board issued a statement distancing themselves from Victor. Neurovita stock plunged. Victor's house was surrounded by cameras before dawn, and somewhere in the chaos an arrest warrant was issued for him. Ethan should have felt triumphant. Instead, he felt hollow. Because truth may destroy corruption, but it does not return what was stolen. It did not bring back Mara. And it did not bring back Lila. While the world devoured the scandal, Ethan drove to the river park again, snow drifting across the pavement in soft spirals. He sat on the same bench where she found him, pulling her scarf from his pocket. "You left to save me," he whispered into the cold. "But you never understood. You were the one thing I did not want to survive without." He closed his eyes, imagining her somewhere under the same sky alone, scared, convinced she was doing the right thing. He needed to find her. Not to save her, but to tell her she was not a burden. She was the first person to see him as something other than a headline or a tragedy. She was the catalyst for everything. Rachel called him just after midnight. "Ethan, brace yourself. Something else is coming." He tensed. "What happened?" Rachel hesitated, then spoke softly. "Victor gave an anonymous interview before he disappeared. He said you destroyed the company over a girl. He implied she was involved in the fraud, that she helped leak documents, that she—" Rachel exhaled sharply. "Ethan, people online are hunting for her. If she is still in the city, she is in danger." A cold wave surged through him. He stood abruptly. "I will find her." Rachel's voice strengthened. "Then you better hurry. The truth has burned your empire to the ground. Now you have to make sure the woman who lit the match in your heart is not swallowed by the fire." Ethan hung up and walked toward his car, snow crunching beneath his shoes. He had lost the company, lost his reputation, lost the identity he clung to through grief, but he had not lost the one thing that finally gave him a reason to breathe again. "Not yet." He murmured her name into the wind like a vow. "Lila. I am coming for you. And this time I will not let you disappear." Snow returned to San Francisco the night before Christmas, thin as salt on the wind, but cold enough to sting the skin, and Ethan Blake stepped off the overnight bus with nothing but a backpack, Lila's scarf, and a determination that felt sharper than breath. He no longer had the penthouse, the office, the company car, or the insulation of privilege. What he had now was clarity. Rachel had traced the last known ping from Lila's phone to a small town outside the city, a place with one streetlight, one gas station, and one church that still rang its bells on holidays. Ethan had boarded the bus without thinking twice, ignoring reporters calling his name at the terminal, ignoring the trending headlines speculating about his fall. Every mile the bus rolled north, he pictured Lila somewhere alone, believing she had to sacrifice herself so he could rise from the ruins of his empire. She never understood that she was the only thing left worth rising for. When the bus stopped on the outskirts of Redwood Hollow just past dawn, the world was quiet except for the crunch of frost beneath his shoes. He asked the gas station clerk if they had seen a girl matching Lila's description. The man nodded slowly. "Yeah. Came through 2 nights ago. Looked tired. Asked about work. The only place hiring this week is the church." That was all Ethan needed. He walked the half-mile through empty streets until the white steeple appeared through the morning fog. Children's paper stars hung in the windows. A hand-painted sign announced the Christmas Eve service. And then he saw her. Through a side window, bent over a table arranging programs with the careful precision of someone who needed work more than she needed rest. Her hair was pulled into a loose braid. Her coat was too thin. And something in her posture, the slight curl of her shoulders, told him she had been crying recently. His breath faltered. He stood there for a long moment, afraid that stepping inside might break whatever fragile piece she'd carved out. But he had come too far to lose her in the doorway of a church. He pushed the door open. It creaked softly. Lila looked up, her fingers stilled on the stack of papers, and for a heartbeat her expression did not change at all. No shock, no joy, just a slow, dawning ache. Ethan stepped forward. She backed up a half step, instinctively guarding herself with silence. "How did you find me?" she whispered. His voice came low, rough from the cold and the sleepless hours. "You left a scarf on a bench. You left a note. And you left me breathing. That was enough to follow." She swallowed hard. "You are not supposed to be here." He took another step. "You walked away because you thought I needed saving. You thought you were in the way. You thought choosing me would destroy my life." Her eyes lowered. "Was I wrong?" Ethan shook his head slowly. "You do not destroy me, Lila. You anchor me." She pressed her lips together as if holding in a cry. "You lost everything because of me." "I lost everything because I let Victor run my life while I hid behind grief," Ethan corrected softly. "You did not ruin me. You reminded me I was still alive." She turned away, voice trembling. "You cannot say that, not after everything that has happened. You cannot believe I am worth all this." Ethan stepped closer until they were inches apart, the winter air rising like smoke from their breath. "You were worth saving from the moment you saved me." Lila shook her head, covering her face with her hands, shoulders shaking. Ethan reached out slowly, gently touching her wrists until her hands fell away. She lifted her gaze, eyes shining with tears she couldn't hold back. "I left because I thought I was protecting you," she whispered. "And I came because losing you felt worse than losing an empire," Ethan murmured. Her breath hitched. Why would you choose me over the life you built? Because that life was built on silence. You are the first thing that made me want to speak. She let out a small broken sound, a confession disguised as breath. Ethan. He reached for her hands again, and this time she did not pull away. In the sanctuary behind them, choir children practiced softly, their voices rising like fragile echoes of hope as the organ hummed beneath. Ethan guided her toward a pew, but instead he sank to his knees in front of her, snow melting from his coat onto the worn wooden floor. Lila froze. Ethan, do not kneel. People will see. Let them, he said quietly. For once I am kneeling because of truth, not for investors or board votes. Only for you. She stared down at him through tears that finally spilled onto her cheeks. I am not someone men kneel for. You are someone I would cross a city, a scandal, and every ruin behind me to reach, he said. You are someone who saved me twice. Once at the river, and once when you walked away, forcing me to become someone stronger than the man you met on that bench. Lila covered her trembling mouth. You make it sound like I am the reason you survived. He nodded. You are. For a long moment, the only sound was the distant carol drifting from the choir room. Then Lila sank onto her knees too, their foreheads almost touching, breath mingling in the cold, hollow stillness of the church. Ethan whispered her name as if it were a prayer. Lila. She reached up and brushed a tear from his cheek with careful fingers, as though afraid he might break. I do not know how to stand next to someone like you without losing myself, she murmured. You do not lose yourself by standing next to me, he said. You help me find who I am supposed to be. She exhaled a shaky breath. I am scared. So am I, he admitted. But I would rather be scared with you than safe without you. Her shoulders sank in surrender, not of weakness but of truth. When she finally leaned forward, pressing her forehead fully against his, it felt like two broken pieces finally aligning into something whole. And then the church bell tolled gently overhead, marking the beginning of Christmas Eve service, its resonance echoing through their bones. Lila whispered something so soft he almost did not hear it. Stay. Ethan closed his eyes as if anchoring the moment to his soul. Always. Outside, snow drifted across the quiet town. Inside, kneeling in a small church lit by stained glass and fragile hope, two people who had spent their lives running from shadows finally stopped. And for the first time they chose the same direction. Winter loosened its grip on San Francisco slowly, as if reluctant to release the city from the quiet solemnity it had wrapped around December. Weeks passed. Investigations widened. Victor was arrested at a private airfield, attempting to flee the country. Board members issued apologies wrapped in legal jargon. Neurovita's stock fractured under the weight of truth, and Ethan Blake's name, once uttered with awe, now appeared beside headlines about whistleblowing, corporate cleansing, and a man who chose morality over power. But none of that mattered to him anymore. What mattered was Lila. After Christmas Eve, they did not rush into a life together. They moved carefully, two people learning how to breathe again without bracing for disaster. She returned to San Francisco with him, but not to the penthouse that felt like a mausoleum of past grief. Instead, they rented a small sunlit apartment above a bakery in Glen Park. It smelled like warm bread every morning, and she said the scent made her feel safe. Ethan found comfort in the ordinary. Washing dishes together, grocery shopping late at night, with no one recognizing him, learning that she hummed under her breath when she cooked, learning that he still woke from nightmares but calmed when she touched his shoulder. Some days grief still wrapped its cold fingers around him. Some days she flinched at loud voices or sudden shadows. Healing was not a miracle. It was a choice repeated each morning, and every morning they made it again. By February his legal battles quieted. By March he officially dissolved his stake in Neurovita, refusing all attempts from the board to pull him back. He donated his settlement to research teams Mara once championed. When reporters asked why he walked away from rebuilding the empire, he said only, "Some things are worth letting go so better things can take root." Rachel's exposé won awards. She hugged him after her acceptance speech and whispered, "You did the right thing, Ethan. You paid a cost most people would never risk." He thought of Lila waiting for him outside the auditorium, leaning against a column with her arms crossed, pretending she was not nervous to be there. The cost had been worth it. Spring arrived with pale sunlight and the hint of blooming jasmine, and with it came moments Ethan once believed he would never feel again. Lila smiling without apology. Ethan laughing without guilt, two people learning they deserved gentleness. On the first warm weekend in April, Ethan suggested they take a walk by the river. She hesitated at first. That place held ghosts, but healing meant returning to the places that once broke you, and discovering they had lost their power. They rode the J train together, fingers loosely intertwined, neither saying much. The closer they got to the waterfront, the quieter she became. He felt her pulse quicken through her hand. When they reached the familiar stretch of park, Ethan slowed. The bench was still there, weathered, cold, a witness that had seen a man ready to fall and a girl brave enough to stop him. Leela's breath hitched softly. He turned to her. "We do not have to go closer." She shook her head. "No, I want to." They approached together. Snow no longer covered the ground, but the memory of that night clung to the air like faint perfume. Ethan sat first, leaving space beside him. Lila lowered herself slowly, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the water. "This place feels different," she whispered. "Because we are different," he said. She leaned her shoulder against his. "I think part of me still fears you will disappear." He let out a quiet breath. "I disappeared once, but I am not going anywhere now." She smiled, small but real. Ethan reached into his coat and pulled out her scarf, the one she left on this bench the night she vanished. "I kept it with me every day," he said. "Not because I was afraid of losing you again, but because it reminded me that I chose to live." Lila touched the soft edge of the scarf, tenderness in her eyes. "I never wanted to hurt you. I believed leaving was the only way to save you." He turned toward her. "Staying saved me." She blinked, breath trembling. "Why did you choose me, Ethan?" "I had nothing. I was nothing." He shook his head slowly. "You were everything I needed, the one person who saw me without the noise, without fear, without expectation. You told me not to die alone when I thought that was all I deserved." Her eyes shimmered. "You deserved more than ruin." "And now," he said, his voice low, steady, "I want you to choose something too. Yourself. Your future. Whatever shape it takes." She exhaled softly. "And you? What shape do you take now?" He thought for a moment, staring out at the river that once tempted him. "Now I am simply a man who stayed." She rested her head on his shoulder, letting her eyes close as the breeze brushed gently across their skin. For a long while they sat in silence, the peaceful kind, the kind that fills rather than empties. Children laughed somewhere in the distance. A bicycle bell chimed. Life moved on, soft and unhurried. Ethan turned slightly, speaking into her hair. "Thank you for not walking away from this moment." She smiled against his shoulder. "Thank you for not walking into the water." He tightened his arm around her waist. "This is where everything began, and it is where we begin again." She tilted her chin up, studying him with eyes that held both past wounds and present hope. "No promises," she whispered. "No grand plans. Just today. Just choosing each other today." He nodded. "Today is enough." They leaned into each other, letting the world drift by in quiet motion. No cameras, no scandals, no boardrooms, no ghosts stronger than the warmth they held now. When the sun dipped lower, casting gold across the river, Ethan looked at the bench, remembering the man who once sat here with a will in his pocket, an emptiness in his chest. And he whispered the truth he had carried since the night she found him. "That night she saved my life. But staying, that was my choice." If you made it here to the end of Ethan and Lila's journey, thank you for staying through every quiet heartbreak, every fragile step toward healing, and every moment when love stood trembling but unbroken. Stories like this are not about perfect people or perfect lives. They are about choosing to stay when everything in you once wanted to run. They are about second chances that arrive in the form of a stranger on a cold night. They are about the ordinary moments that become extraordinary simply because someone dared to care. If this story touched you even a little, if you felt the weight of that riverbank, or the softness of that small apartment above the bakery, or if you found yourself hoping these two broken souls would find their way back to each other, then I would love for you to join this community. Your support is what keeps these stories alive. It helps us bring more tales of healing, redemption, and unexpected love to people around the world who might need them more than they know. So, if you have not already, please take a second to like this video. It may seem small, but it tells the YouTube universe that this story mattered to you. And if you enjoy stories about unlikely love, about hope, rising from the most painful places, about people who refuse to give up on themselves or each other, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss the next chapter. Every week, we share a new story that tries to hold a mirror to the parts of life that are hard to talk about, the parts we often carry silently. And if you felt something today, I hope you will share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us which moment hit you. Was it the river scene? Was it the night she left to save him? Was it the bus ride across the state just to say "I choose you"? Or was it that simple, quiet promise at the end, the one that reminded us all that staying is a choice, not an accident? We read every comment. we learn from every word you share. And it means more than you know to see where you are watching from. So drop a comment and tell us your city or your country. Tell us your favorite line. Tell us if you stayed up late listening. Tell us if you cried a little. You would be surprised how many people from different corners of the world end up connecting in the replies. And if this story reminded you of someone in your life, someone who showed up when you needed it most, or someone you quietly love, but have never found the courage to tell, maybe this is your sign. Maybe tonight is the night you send them a message, or simply hold them a little closer. Life is short, but the moments that save us often come from people we never expected. Just like Ethan, just like Lila, just like a poor girl who stopped a billionaire from disappearing into the dark and changed everything. Thank you again for being here, for listening, for feeling, for letting these stories be a small part of your day. Until the next one, take care of your heart. It has survived more than you realize, and it deserves softness too.